I would like now to spend my time that we have left in this webinar today talking about data presentation, having talked through a few basic aspects of statistical analysis and statistical work that you do with your data when you get started collecting and analyzing the data. Let's now talk about presentation, because this is something that so many authors don't do as well as they can. You have all seen articles in academic journals where it's difficult to get the message out of the figures. The figures, the data tables, as we've discussed, are often something that people do first. When they initially collect their data, they produce a summary data table, they produce a summary set of figures. It's often the bit of academic paper writing that you do first, the results, the data summary. But are you presenting your data in a clear, concise, and easy to understand way? What's the question that your research is addressing? Are your figures, your data tables, your presentation of information correlated with that key question that you're trying to ask? And do people get the message? Keep in mind that very often these days, people download figures from academic papers without reading the rest of the article. It happens all the time. So you have to make sure that your data, your figure, your table, and its caption contain enough information for somebody to, on their own, independently interpret the meaning of that particular data presentation of that particular figure. So basic stuff. Do you have your fonts large enough to easily read? Many authors don't do that. Are you referencing all your figures in the body of your text, of your article text? Are you giving all your figures appropriate self-contained captions for the reasons that we've just discussed? Include the figure description and analysis also in the body text, and think about where it's going to be best in your article to place those figures, because often authors don't do this either. They don't give the production department at the journal, their target journal, information about where figures should be placed. You want your figures, your tables, close to their descriptions in the actual article itself. So these are things to think about, and you would be amazed how many people do not think about these issues when they write and publish their articles. I am now going to introduce you to one of my favorite articles published in the academic literature of all time. Rougier et al. 2014, PLOS Computational Biology, 10 Simple Rules for Making Better Figures. I love this paper. I talk about this paper all the time. We are going to go through some of the simple rules that Rougier and co presented in order to help you, to give you some advice to make better figures. Data, present your data in better, more effective ways. Rule number 1, know your audience. What's your target journal? Excuse me. Which journal are you sending your paper to? Who's going to be reading it? Obviously, if I write a paper about cancer and I publish that in a medical journal, it's going to be different, the audience, the kinds of people who are going to be reading that paper, than if I publish it in a general biology journal. So the first thing to think about when putting together data presentations is your audience. What journal are you submitting it to? And so what kind of presentation will you be giving? Okay, so that's the first thing to think about when putting together your figures, your message, but also who's going to be reading your paper. So you need to know the message, you need to know how you're going to get across that information, transmit that information effectively to your audience. So who's going to be reading the paper? Who are the audience? Rule number 2 then is to identify your message and make sure that your figures, make sure that your data presentations accurately and efficiently actually do get your message across. Adapting to your medium is also very important. You can see here that one of these two figures would be more appropriate for publication in a journal, whereas the one on the left that shows the same data might be more appropriate for presentation perhaps at a conference when it can be projected onto a big screen or presented in an academic poster format. I'm getting the same information across, but I might be doing it in a way that's more adapted to the particular medium that I've chosen to use in this particular format. So maybe a journal article versus a conference presentation in this case, for example. Rule number 4, we've talked about this already. Your captions are not an option. You must include enough information in your figure and table captions for somebody to be able to independently, on their own, evaluate that data presentation without having to read the rest of the article. As we talked about very often, people download figures and tables from online publications without reading the rest of the paper. So rule number 4, captions, gotta have them, gotta be as information rich as possible. And my personal favorite rule, be careful about your software. When I was a PhD student, people used to tell me, you're working in this particular field, you should be using this particular piece of software to make your figures. No, you should use a software package for making your figures for your academic papers that you are happy with and that you know how to use. Don't let other people force you into using software that you don't actually know how to use, because what you want as a researcher publishing a number of papers throughout your career, you want to develop a consistent style to your figures. You want all of your figures to look the same, so people will think, oh, that's Gareth Dyke, that's the way that his figures look. So be careful about the software packages that you use, and don't forget to also think about your use of color. Which of these figures is easier for you to understand the message? I'm not going to answer that because other people, colleagues, may have different interpretations of the same data, but you are going to be thinking about how you can use color effectively in your figures. Of course, most of the work that you publish in your career these days will be online. Much of it will be open access, such as, for example, the journals and ebooks that our colleagues at Bentham Science are publishing, so you don't have to pay like we used to do in the past for color picture reproduction in journals. You can use color effectively, and you should never, ever mislead people with your data presentation. Here's the same data presented in 2 different ways, using the full range in black and using the partial range in red. Which should you be doing? You should be presenting all of the data. But as you can see here, if I present the data just by using the partial range, as in the red, it looks like there's much more variation in the data than there actually is. We have responsibility as academic authors to present our data fairly and not to mislead our audience. Rule number 8, avoid junk. And here you can see again on the right and left hand sides of this slide 2 different ways to present the same data. And I don't need to answer my question, which of these is easier for you as an observer to understand and extract information from? Very clear. That's what you should be doing. Rule number 9, often your figures don't have to be beautiful to get across that clear message. Remember, the message in your academic paper writing is the most important thing. It doesn't really make a difference that this figure is a bit informal looking. I can clearly see the message in the figure. Often that's more important than having a figure that looks absolutely amazing but is quite confusing. Number 10, as we've talked about already, find a software tool that works for you. Be careful about color, be careful about your kind of readers. Those are some suggestions for you for effective data presentation. Now, I want to go back quickly and look at data tables, because these are often the kinds of things that people do very first of all when they first collected their data. The easiest way to read and present your data initially, perhaps in your article or in an online supplement, would be as a data table. The reader does not have to struggle to find information. This is a presentation of your work. And of course, good-looking tables make you and your study much more professional, and they will be important for supporting your conclusions. So very important again to put the time and energy into effective data tables. Often you'll find, of course, that presenting all of your actual data can be unnecessary and confusing. So you would use tables if a trend is not important, there's a number of values that's small, and indeed to complement other data presentation formats. Here are two presentations of the same data. We're looking at the population of Wales, which is part of the United Kingdom. Do I really need to give all of these significant figures in my data presentation? Wouldn't it be much simpler if I presented in the table 2 format? People can much more easily get out from this table the trend that the population has increased over the last 100 years or so. So these are also important things to think about. Tables should not be filled with grid lines. We read from left to right, top to bottom. Time is presented from the past to the present, and increasing size from small to large. When comparing numbers, it's often easier for the reader if you put those numbers in columns rather than rows. So reading across a data presentation rather than from top to bottom. And here are some principles that editors would like to get across in terms of principles for use in terms of your data tables. And above all, as is often the message in academic writing and data presentation, keep it simple. Use a consistent scale, use a space to separate your data, and use a consistent number of decimal places or significant figures. Very important techniques to have a look at when putting together a data table. What do we think about this example? Do we think this is a well-presented, effective presentation of our data or not? Well, here you can see lots of formatting and data presentation issues, an editor's nightmare. But you'd be amazed again, like just how many people do submit this kind of thing to academic journals. Ladies and gentlemen, please don't do this yourself in your own writing. Here's a good table, clear to understand, accurate, and fitting with the conventions of most journals. Thinking again about who your audience is going to be, what are you presenting, and what is it that you wish to show with your data, with your presentation. And of course, you can do this once. You can create a usable template for your future work, for your future data presentations. Often people also use histograms, graphical representations of frequency tables, in order to summarize categorical, nominal, and ordinal data. And again, here are some rules, some general rules of thumb to follow when putting together a histogram to summarize your initial data in an academic research project. People also use pie charts, suitable, of course, for the representation of categorical data, used to show percentages, in which case the areas, of course, as you know, are proportional to the value of a particular category. Never use pie charts to show historical data over time. There's no time axis on these data presentations. You also can't use them to show data in a frequency distribution. So these are, again, important tips in terms of data presentation to keep in mind as a researcher. Which of these is easier for you to understand? It's the same data. We're thinking about people's daily good health, dietary intake, which of these presentations of the same data is easier for you to understand? Again, I'm not going to answer that question. Maybe we'll have some competing opinions on this particular question, but you are looking for data presentations in your own work that get your message across and that are easy for people to understand and get out the message that you want to present to your particular specific audience. I'll finish up by just quickly saying that there are plenty of tools that you can use to plot and do statistical analyses. Some of the main ones are shown here. We, of course, can provide you with additional training. If this is an area that you or your research group feel that you need additional help with, please don't hesitate to get in touch with us at the end of this webinar presentation. Today, I will wrap up by summarizing what we've talked about in this presentation. We've talked firstly about understanding data and the basics of statistical analysis. We've then also talked about effective data presentation and selling the message of your work. The goal of this is to help you as a researcher perform statistics and data presentation more easily. And I will remind you as we come to the end of this webinar today that, of course, this has been a joint presentation between Bentham Science and Diffusion Editing. We are happy to provide you with a discount code that you can use at our website to get access to our editing services. I would also encourage you to reach out to our wonderful colleagues at Bentham Science. They're great publishers of hybrid and open access journals, a huge range of topics, as well as ebooks. And of course, you can access our website if you're interested in any more of our training events. My name is Gareth Dyke, and thank you so much for listening to this presentation today. Have a great day. Thanks for tuning in.